cutie, I'm back. And today we have another episode of Beauty and the Bibliophile. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I'm Leah. If you're not new here, thank you for returning. As often as I can, I do a series called Beauty and the Bibliophile, where I do my makeup and I tell you about the latest book that I've read. If you don't know what a bibliophile is, it is a lover and a collector of books. That would be me. Today's book is the original story of Beauty and the Beast. The original story that the Disney movie was based on. Now, spoiler alerts, if you're thinking about reading this and you don't want to know anything about it, then definitely don't watch this video. Get out of here right now. If you don't want to read the book, but you still want to know what it's about, or you've already read it and you just want to hear my take on it and watch me do my makeup at the same time, then this video here is a good one for you. Also, I get a little complainy in this video. My hair fell flat because it's so hot and I'm sweaty. And there was a bunch of distractions during this one. So I apologize in advance if I'm a little whiny. I'm sorry. But the story's still really good. So why don't we get started? All right, so Beauty and the Beast from 1756. This is an old one. I think maybe the oldest story we've done so far. Also, by the way, if you're interested in any of the products that I'm using, they're listed in the description box, just in case you're wondering what it is. So once upon a time, there was a very rich merchant, and he had 3 daughters and 3 sons. And he spared no expense when it came to their education. And all his daughters were very beautiful, but especially the youngest. And growing up her whole life, everyone called her Little Beauty. And as she grew up, the nickname stuck, which made her 2 sisters very jealous. Now, not only was she more beautiful than her sisters, she was also just a nicer, cooler person, and everyone just liked her for her. Her sisters, on the other hand, thought they were better than everybody just because they were rich, and they would spend all their time just going to fancy parties and balls. And they would make fun of their younger sister, Beauty, because she liked to spend her spare time reading. She wasn't interested in all these superficial things. Now one day, the story doesn't say why, but this rich merchant lost everything except for a small country house that they owned on the outside of town. And when he told his children, the girls, the 2 oldest daughters, were very upset because they didn't want to move out to the country and have to work on the land and work for a living. And the 2 oldest daughters were like, well, we're not going. They were like, you know, we both have multiple boyfriends that I'm sure will want to marry us and provide for us and take care of us, even though, you know, we no longer have a dowry. However, big surprise, the girls were mistaken. None of their lovers wanted to marry them now that they were impoverished. Several men, though, still wanted to marry Beauty because she had always been such a nice, well-tempered girl. Okay, I'm going to let my skincare sit in for a few minutes before we move on to makeup. But Beauty could not think of leaving her father and her family in their time of need, so she didn't take any of these men up on their offers. And at first, you know, Beauty was sad too that they lost their fortune, but, you know, she just said to herself that crying doesn't make things better, so I'm just gonna have to find a way to be happy without money. At their country house, the father and the 3 sons, they would busy themselves with tending the land and doing all the laborious work. And Beauty was in charge of the house, cleaning, cooking, that kind of stuff. And when she would get up at 4 a.m. every day to do all this stuff. And when she was done with her work, she would read or play her harpsichord or sing while she was spinning. Like spinning yarn, not spinning. But her two sisters, they didn't get up until 10 every day, and they didn't help at all. They just moped around, and they were constantly like talking to themselves and like making fun of Beauty, that she could be content with this life. But the girl's father knew better. He knew that his youngest daughter outshone the other two, not only in her physical beauty, but in her mind. He also knew that they left all the housework to Beauty and insulted her whenever they got a chance. After about a year of this, the merchant got a letter saying that one of his shipments that had been delayed for a very long time had finally arrived, and that he could come pick up the goods. So the two sisters, the older sisters, their ears perked up when they heard this, thinking that, oh great, now we're gonna get our fortune back. And they immediately started asking their father for gowns and ribbons and all these trifles that they wanted. But Beauty didn't ask for anything, because she was smart enough to know that this small shipment wouldn't barely even cover the costs of everything that her sisters wanted. Now her father asked her, after he listened to the girls ask for all this stuff, he said, well, what would you like, Beauty? And Beauty, she just asked for a red rose, because she thought they were very beautiful and they didn't really grow in that area. So when their father, he left on his journey to the docks, and when he got there, there was some sort of issue with the goods, some sort of misunderstanding, and he wasn't able to get them. And he actually ended up leaving there poorer than before. Now, on his way back, when he was about 30 miles from home, he got lost in the forest, and it started to rain, and the winds really kicked up, and they were so strong that they knocked him off his horse. And it began to get dark, and he started to worry that maybe he might freeze to death or be eaten by wolves that he could hear howling all around him. Then suddenly he saw some light in the distance. He started to walk towards it, and he saw that it was a palace. He was like, oh, thank God. So he goes towards the place, and when he goes into the outer courtyard, nobody was there to greet him like was customary. But he saw that there was a large stable, so he put his horse in there to get him out of the rain and so that he could rest and eat. Then he went to the front door, but again, nobody was there. So he went inside, where there was a fire and a grand table full of food. And since he was soaking wet, he went and dried himself by the fire. And then he started to eat some of the food off of the table. And, he felt kind of bad just helping himself. He thought, I hope the master of this house or some servants or something show up here shortly. Hopefully they don't mind the liberties that I'm taking. So then he ate some food, and he had a couple glasses of wine, but still no one showed up. So he started to wander around the palace, because it was very beautiful and he was admiring it. And he came to a little apartment that had a very comfortable looking bed. And since it was past midnight and he was so exhausted, he ended up crawling into the bed and going to sleep. So he woke up the next morning around 10 o'clock, and there was some fresh clothes laid out for him. And he was starting to think that maybe this palace was run by some magical fairy that had seen him in the forest and took pity on him. And he changes into the clothes, and he's looking out the window, and there's a beautiful garden outside. So then he goes and he returns to the hall that he had been at the previous night, and there is some hot chocolate on the table waiting for him. And so he says out loud, "Thank you so much for the breakfast." He's like, I'm very thankful for everything that you've done for me. Then he drank his hot chocolate, and he goes out to the stables to get his horse so he can leave. Now on his way to the stables, he had to pass through the garden, and he saw some beautiful roses, and he remembered Beauty's request. So he began to pick some, but then he immediately heard and saw a gigantic beast coming towards him. And the beast said in a terrible voice, he's like, "You're very ungrateful. I saved your life and you're stealing my roses?" He's like, "I value my roses more than anything." He's like, "You're gonna die for that, and I give you 15 minutes to say your prayers." Now the merchant fell on his knees and started begging him for his life. He said, "My lord, I beseech you, please forgive me. I was only gathering some roses for my daughters." And the beast was like, "My name is not my lord, it's Beast." Which explains why in the Disney movie they never give us the beast's name. At least not in the first one. My God, it's hot. My God. Ugh. And he's like, "I don't like compliments." I like people who just say what they think and know that I can't be flattered. Then he's like, "But you say you have daughters." So the beast is like, "Well, I'll tell you what. I will forgive you and let you go if you go back home and you get one of your daughters to willfully come back in your place. But swear to me that if any of them, if all of them refuse to come, that you'll come back here within 3 months." Now the merchant was not about to sacrifice any of his children to this monster. So he figured he would go back home to see them one last time and say goodbye, and then he would just come back on his own. So he promised the beast. Then the beast told him to go back, before he left, to go back to his room where there would be a great chest and that he could fill it with whatever he wanted. And the beast would send it along after him to his home after he left. And then the beast just leaves. And the merchant was thinking, well, if I'm gonna die, it would be nice to be able to leave my poor children something. So he goes back to his room where there is a chest and there's a bunch of gold pieces laying all around his room. So he fills up the chest and locks it. Then he goes to the stable, grabs his horse, and goes home. When he got home and he saw his children, he started crying. He gave Beauty the roses and then told them all what had happened. And the two oldest daughters began crying and acting upset, and they were like, to Beauty, they were like, "You just had to have some roses, didn't you? And now it's going to be the death of our poor father." And they're like, "Look, she's not even upset. She's not even crying about it." And Beauty was like, "Well, why should I cry?" She's like, "I'm going to go in his place." She's like, "And I'm happy to do so." Ooh, these are some horrible eyebrows. When it's this hot, I cannot do makeup. I can't. But the brothers were like, no, Beauty, you're not going to be doing that. They're like, "We're going to go and find this beast and we're going to kill him." And the father was like, "No, you can't do that because this beast is too strong. He'll overtake all three of you easily." And then the father, he says to Beauty, he's like, "I'm moved by your offer, but I can't let you go. I'm old and I've lived my life already." But Beauty said, she goes, "Well, you can't stop me from following you to the palace." She insisted on going, and her sisters were quite happy about this because now they were finally getting rid of her. Now the merchant was, so upset that he had forgotten all about the gold, that chest of gold. So when he went to bed that night, he goes up to his room and there's the chest of gold. And he decides, not to tell his children about it because they would probably insist that, okay, now we can afford to move back to town. And the merchant, he liked living in the country. He didn't want to move back to town. Need something to cool me off. Going to be using an appropriate palette. He did tell Beauty, however, about the chest of gold. He trusted her with the secrets. Beauty told her father that while he was gone, her sisters had actually been courting a couple of gentlemen. And Beauty insisted that her father use this new fortune as their dowries because, you know, even though her sisters were mean to her, she loved them and she wanted them to be happy. Now when Beauty and her father got ready to depart to go back to the Beast's castle, the sisters rubbed their eyes with onions to make it look like they were crying and sad to see her leave. And Beauty's brothers, they were genuinely upset. But Beauty was the only one who wasn't crying because she didn't want to, you know, add to the sadness of the moment. So when Beauty and her father got to the castle and they went inside, in that great hall, again, there was a table full of food waiting for them. Now the merchant was so upset about losing his daughter that he couldn't eat. But Beauty ate happily because she didn't want to let on that she was sad too. And she kind of thought that, you know, all this food had been out for them because the Beast wanted to fatten her up before he ate her. When they had finished eating, they heard a terrible sound and the Beast came into the dining area. And both the merchant and Beauty began to tremble. And Beauty was quite horrified by his form. But she took courage, and when the Beast asked her if she had come there willingly, she, in a trembling voice, said yes. And the Beast said to her, he was like, well, you know, you must be a very good person then. And he turns to the merchant and he's like, and you too, you're a good person too because you kept your word. And he tells the merchant that he can leave in the morning, but he can never come back. Then the Beast leaves and the merchant turns to his daughter and he's like, you know, let me stay here. He's like, you get out of here right now and I'll stay. You go home. But Beauty was resolute and she was like, nope. She's like, you're going to go home in the morning and you're going to leave me here with Providence. So then the two of them, they retired for the evening. Now that night, Beauty dreamed that a fine woman came to her and said, Beauty, with your goodwill, this good action of yours, and giving up your own life to save your father's, shall not go unrewarded. So in the morning, Beauty told her father about the dream, hoping that maybe, you know, it would bring him some comfort. But it didn't really, and he had to leave. He couldn't stop crying. After her father left, Beauty went and sat down in the great hall. She began to cry for a little bit. But because she was a woman of courage, she said a prayer, and she decided that she was not going to spend the little time that she had left upset, because she thinks that the Beast is going to have her for dinner that night, literally. So she began to walk around this beautiful palace and admire it. And she was very surprised when she came to a door with a sign over it that said Beauty's apartment. She goes inside and there is a magnificent apartment with a huge library and a harpsichord. She thinks to herself, well, at least, you know, the little time I'm here, I won't be bored. But then she thinks, like, why would the Beast set all this up for her if she's only going to be there like a day or two? So she goes over to the books and she pulls one out, and in sparkly gold letters it says, Welcome, Beauty, banish fear. You are queen and mistress here. Speak your wishes, speak your will. Swift obedience meets them still. So out loud, she said that the only thing that she really wanted was to see and to know that her poor father was doing okay. And so she looks up from the book, and on the wall is a looking glass. And in the looking glass, she can see a scene of her father returning home and her sisters and brothers greeting him. And she can tell that her sisters are actually quite happy to have gotten rid of her. And then the scene in the mirror disappears. Now that evening at dinner, Beauty is in the Great Hall again, sitting at the table eating, and the Beast comes in and he asks her if he can join her. And she says, well, if you please. And he's like, you know, you're the mistress of the house now, so whatever you want. He's like, if me being here like bothers you, you know, I'll leave. But she didn't ask him to leave. And he says to her, he's like, do you think I'm ugly? Now Beauty couldn't lie. She told him that, you know, that what he says is true, but that he was a good person and that that's what mattered. And the monster says, he's like, yeah, he's like, I try to be a good person, but I do know that, you know, I am an ugly creature. But again, Beauty reminds him that he's a good person and he is a humble person, and that is very good qualities. And Beauty continues to eat her dinner, and she thanks him for everything. And then she tells him that, you know, because of his kindness, that his deformity doesn't seem as severe as when she first met him. And the Beast agrees with her. He's like, yes, thank you. He's like, you know, like I said, I try to be a good person, but I am still a monster. And Beauty says, maybe. But among mankind, there are many that deserve that name more than you, and I prefer your company over many of the so-called beautiful people. And the Beast thanks her, and he says, you know, if I was a smarter person, I would compliment you in return. But all I can say is thank you. Now Beauty finishes up her dinner, and right about the time she's starting to like get comfortable with the Beast, she almost faints when he asks her if she will be his wife. Now a few seconds went by before she could answer. She was a little bit afraid of upsetting him and making him angry, but finally she got the courage and she just said, no, Beast. And when she said that, he got, you know, a little hurt, and he let out a tremendous hissing sound that shook the whole palace. But he said in a mournful voice, he said, very well. And then he leaves to go out of the dining hall, and he turns around and looks at her once, but then continues on his way. Beauty felt a little bad for the Beast. She's like, gosh darn it, she's like, why does someone who's so nice and good-mannered have to be so ugly? Now 3 months goes by, and Beauty is living at the palace very happily. And every evening at supper, the Beast joins her, and they talk and they become friends. And Beauty got to know him pretty well, and she sincerely liked him. And she even, you know, grew quite accustomed to his appearance. Didn't really even bother her anymore. And she really looked forward to their dinners together. But every night after dinner, the Beast would always ask her to marry him. And she would always say no. And one night, Beauty told him, she's like, listen, she's like, it makes me a little uncomfortable the way you're always asking me to marry you. She's like, I'm never going to say yes. And she's telling him this. She's like, you know, I don't want to lead you on. That's why I'm telling you this. And I hope you can be happy with us just being friends. And the Beast was like, well, If I must remain your friend, I must. He's like, but I am in love with you, and I'm very happy that you decided to stay. He's like, promise me you'll never leave. Now, Beauty had seen in the magic looking glass that her father was literally worried sick about her and had taken ill. And Beauty was like, oh, I promise. She's like, you know, but my father is sick and I'm worried to death about him. And the Beast was like, oh, I would rather die myself than you be worried about your father. He's like, you go back to your family and I'll just stay here and die of heartbreak. Beauty was like, no. She's like, I don't want you to die of heartbreak. She's like, how about I just go and visit him? I'll come back in a week. He's like, okay, well then you shall be there tomorrow. He's like, just remember your promise. He's like, and when you're ready to return, take off your ring and put it on your bedside table. And then the Beast left with a heavy sigh. When she woke up the next morning, she was in her father's house, and a maid had come into the room and seen her and screamed. And then her father came running into the room and thought he had died and gone to heaven when he saw his daughter there. Then the maid found a trunk full of the most beautiful gowns made of gold and diamonds. Now Beauty, she goes and she picks out the plainest of all the dresses and she gets dressed. And then she tells her father that she wants to give all the other dresses to her sisters. But when she says this, the trunk like disappears into thin air. And her father is like, I think this is the Beast insisting that you keep these gowns for yourself. And right then, the trunk reappears. Now both her sisters had gotten married since she had left, and so they had to send for them to come and see Beauty. Can you hear the helicopters? I swear to God, I need to move. Please, God. If I wait for the helicopter to stop, I'm gonna be here all day, and it's very hot in here, so I'm just gonna keep going. Now both the sisters were very unhappy with how their lives turned out. The oldest sister had married a very handsome gentleman, but he was so conceited that he neglected his wife. And then the younger sister had married a very smart person, but he only used his intelligence to take advantage of other people, his wife most of all. When Beauty's sisters saw her in the most beautiful gowns, looking more beautiful than ever, and after hearing about how happy she was in her new life, were very envious. And when they got a moment alone, they were venting to each other and saying how Beauty thinks she's better than us now. So the older sister says that they should try and get Beauty to stay longer than a week and break her promise to the Beast, and maybe he'd become so enraged that he would devour her. And the younger sister was like, yeah, but you know, we should be super nice to her so she doesn't catch on. So they were being super nice to Beauty, and poor Beauty thought they were being genuine. She thought, oh man, they must have really missed me. Now when the week was up and Beauty was getting ready to return, the sisters, you know, made a big deal and started crying and begging for her to stay. And so Beauty said, okay, well, I'll stay a week longer. I don't know if you can hear that. The megaphone from the helicopter. An 89-year-old man is missing. Last seen wearing a gray pants and a shirt with a walker. Poor guy. He couldn't have gotten far with a walker. Where was I? Am I ever gonna finish this? Okay, so anyway, after she had stayed a few more days, she started feeling bad about having broken her promise to the Beast. She said she was gonna be back in a week, Plus, since she did sincerely care for him, she was missing him. And then on her 10th day being gone, she had a dream that she was back at the palace and that she saw him laid out in the garden, and it seemed like he was dying. I think this guy went missing last weekend too. Now when Beauty woke up the next morning, she burst into tears. She's like, I've been so wicked and he was so kind to me. Hold on. This helicopter situation is very distracting. I'm gonna do my lips and hopefully they will have left by then. One sec. Okay. I think they're finally gone. Now, gotta remember where I was again. Oh yeah, she was feeling bad after the dream. And she was thinking to herself, oh man, I am so wicked, and after everything he did for me, I broke my promise to him. She was like, it's not his fault. He's so ugly, he's good and kind, and why did I refuse to marry him? He would be a much better husband than the two guys that her sisters married. She's thinking, she's like, you know, it's not a beautiful face that makes a good husband, but kindness and virtue, sweetness of temper, and he has all these qualities. She's like, you know, it's true, I'm not exactly tender for him, if you know what I mean, but she did have high esteem for him and admired him, thought he was a good person, and they had a great friendship. She's just like, ugh, I'm never gonna forgive myself for being so ungrateful. So she took off her ring and she put it on her bedside table, and the next morning she woke up in the Beast's palace, and she was very happy, and she got dressed and ready for dinner. She goes running downstairs to the Great Hall expecting him to come for dinner, but he never showed up. She's like, oh my gosh, she's like, did I cause his death or something? And she gets all upset, starts crying, and she starts running around the castle looking for him. Then she remembered her dream, so she goes running out to the garden and she sees him all laid out. She goes running over to him and she puts her arms around him, and she can hear his heart still beating. So she runs and she gets some water and she pours it on his head. So the Beast opens his eyes and he sees her and he's like, you forgot your promise. He's like, you know, I thought I had lost you forever, so I just resolved to starve myself. And he's like, but since you're here now, I'm super happy because I get to see you one more time before I die. And it was very dramatic. And Beauty's like, no, you can't die because I want you to be my husband. She's like, I want to marry you. She's like, I swear, you know, I'll be none but yours. She's like, I thought I wanted to just be friends, but now that I'm seeing you in this condition and I might lose you, I'm realizing that I want to be more than friends. She's like, I don't think I can live without you. Now, as soon as she said this, the whole palace began to light up and sparkle, and she's looking up at it, and then she turns back to the Beast who had been laying at her feet, and he had disappeared. And instead, there was the most handsomest prince. And he looks at her and he thanks her for having broken the charm that he had been under for so long. Now Beauty was confused. She's looking around, she's like, where's the Beast? And the guy is like, that's me, I'm him. He's like, a while back, a wicked fairy put a curse on me to remain in that form until a beautiful virgin would love me enough to want to marry me. And he's like, and it's only you in this whole world who could ever love me based on my character. Then Beauty and the prince, they go back into the castle, and Beauty is super happy because her whole family is there. And then that beautiful woman from her dream comes walking up to her and she says, "Beauty, receive your reward for your good choices. You preferred virtue over wit or beauty and deserve a person who has all these qualities. You are going to be a great queen. Just remember to not let the throne make you forget who you are." Then she turns to Beauty's two sisters and says, "As for you, ladies, I know your hearts and all the malice they contain. You will become two statues, but you will keep your minds. You will stand before your sister's palace gates, and your punishment is to watch her be happy for the rest of her life." Now, Beauty and the prince were married, and their happiness, since it was founded on virtue, was complete. The end. I loved this version of Beauty and the Beast. Now, the copy that I got was the English and French translation. So you had the English on one side of the page and French on the other. So you can see how, like, the translation, the English version, like, the language was very romantic. And like I said, a little dramatic, but it was still beautiful and fun. And I think we all know what the lesson of Beauty and the Beast is, that beauty lies within, and that we shouldn't be judging people on how they look, whether they're beautiful or not. Also, because of this heat, my hair fell flat. Oh wow, my makeup turned out pretty cute though. I think I like it. I like this lip. Anyways, I will link this book in the description box for you if you're curious to read it for yourself. I would suggest reading it for yourself because I can't, you know, express it in the beautiful language that it does. If there are any stories that you would like me to cover on this channel, just let me know in the comments and I'll look into it. It doesn't have to be a fairy tale. I would love a fairy tale, but it can really be anything, within reason, of course. And if you liked this video, let me know by giving it a like. Make sure and subscribe, do all that stuff so you don't miss any uploads. And what else? I guess just remember that beauty lies within. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! If you're new here, my name is Leia. No, that's not what I say. If you don't know what a bibliophile... So when his father... And I'm glad that you've... After she had been there for a few more days, she started to feel bad. And because their happiness was founded on virtue, and their happiness was based on virtue. Now, Beauty and the Prince were married, and their happiness, since it was based on virtue. Now, Beauty and the Prince, they get married, and because their happiness is based... No, why can't I say this? I guess I'll just read it.